Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to episode 311 of the Falcoholic Live. I'm your host, Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin, joined by my co-host, he is Adnan Ikic at Say Which Way. Adnan, I know the Hawks are mid-NBA Cup semifinal match? Semifinal?
Quarterfinal.
Quarterfinal match. So Adnan is really coming through, coming on to talk about these terrible Falcons while an actual semi-competent Atlanta sports team is performing. So we do appreciate your dedication to the program, Adnan. But hopefully the Hawks will come through for you when the Falcons obviously have not this year. But regardless, how are you doing on this fine Wednesday evening?
What can I say? I love the viewers. So it's always a pleasure, and the show must go on. Even though the Hawks are playing on the road, it's still a Wednesday, and we still have another terrible Falcons game to digest because this season has just come off the rails at this point.
Yes, it's very familiar, especially this time of year, for us to be having this conversation. It's very unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's become a December tradition at this point, unfortunately, of just us talking about how, the Falcons are on some new losing streak and how the season is pretty much, it's not over, but man, it sure is very close to feeling like it.
Yeah, and because of how terrible this division is, it's not over. In fact, the Falcons still have roughly a 50% chance, maybe a little bit less, of making the playoffs, which feels crazy considering that this team is 6-7, but the Bucks are only 7-6. So only one game separates these teams, and if the Bucks falter this week against the Chargers, who, as we know, are a pretty good football team, Bucks also reeling from their own set of injuries, then the Falcons just have to take care of business against a Las Vegas Raiders team that is currently in the number one spot in the NFL draft and could be starting Desmond Ridder on Monday, although apparently there's some intrigue about whether or not he actually will start. But theoretically, the Falcons should be able to win this game on Monday Night Football.
I mean, no matter who starts, if it's O'Connell or Ritter, if the Falcons lose to the Raiders, I'm declaring season over. Even if the Bucks lose to the Chargers, which I think they might, because I think this is the one game left in the season where the Bucks aren't favored. I mean, the Chargers are a really good football team. They went toe-to-toe against the Chiefs this past week. I think Tampa does have to fly out west for that one. And I feel like this was one where, looking at it coming into this final stretch, I was like, okay, Bucks will probably lose that one, and that gives the Falcons room to lose one more, and that one more was, the Vikings. So if the Bucks do lose it, the Falcons, I think, do have to win out unless something crazy happens and, the Saints or Panthers beat Tampa Bay, which, I mean, it could happen.
The Panthers, actually. The Panthers have been spicy.
But then again, the Panthers being spicy isn't good for the Falcons either, because,
cuts both ways. That's true. It does. It cuts both ways. So definitely curious to see how this plays out. But the Falcons just need to win. I think the Falcons do keep winning. Like, if they can win these easier games, Washington probably the one game that you circle as being pretty challenging, then they could very much still win this division, especially if the Bucks do lose this weekend. But not a lot of room for error, so we'll see if they can pull it off. Yeah,
even at 6-7. So right now, let's say the Falcons win out, because I feel like that's a near non-negotiable at this point. If you go 10-7, maybe that'll get you a wild card spot. 10 wins. I feel like it'd be hard done to not get one, but the NFC has been so good this year that it's no guarantee. But either way, I feel like even if the Falcons do, push through against some of these, poorer teams, the problem is how they're playing. The thing is, what will they look like in the play? I feel like they would be food for any, playoff team at this point, the way if they don't, severely change some stuff over the next month.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So I'm not super encouraged, but we'll see if anything changes over this month. The Falcons certainly could turn things around. They fell off a cliff in a month, so maybe they could improve in a month too. But before we dive into the topic du jour, which of course is the Falcons' decision to stick with Kirk Cousins at quarterback over at least this week, but presumably over the final stretch, we're going to dive into our sponsor, BetOnline. Thanks again for sponsoring the show, folks. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting options, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to place bets on the games while they're happening. Again, I'm sure you could be live betting on this Hawks game. I don't know anything about basketball betting, but I think betting live on the games, is aggressive. But we're Falcons fans, so we really can't say anything about degeneracy on this platform. But no matter what you want to bet on, folks, BetOnline's got the largest selection of odds. Everything from football, college football, bowl season's coming up, the NBA, college basketball, NHL, UFC, MMA, boxing, all that good stuff. They've got it. So what are you waiting for, folks? Head to that website, betonline.ag today, and don't forget to use our promo code when you sign up. It's BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, Adnan. Well, we'll start the Kirk Cousins discussion with how he fared against the Vikings, which I don't think it was as bad as the Chargers game, certainly. Would have been hard to be as bad as the Chargers game. But at least in this game, there were some flashes and there were some throws that were impressive. But there were still 2 really bad turnovers, and his limitations were on full display. And, I think fans left obviously feeling like he's not good enough at this stage. But Falcons do elect to stick with him, and we'll obviously get to that later in the show. But wondering your thoughts sort of on the performance against the Vikings and your take on it. Compared, obviously, to the Chargers, it's good, but,
Yeah. And that's what Raheem Morris said as well. And I don't know, like I didn't like him bringing up the Chargers game, the press conference, saying, "Oh, he was good when you compare it to last week." Last week should not be the barometer. Like the hurdle to clear should not be 4 interceptions. But look, there were some good and some bad. Now some good. One thing that really stuck out, that deep pass to Darnell Mooney, which went for 50 yards early in the game. I think that may have been his best throw of the season overall. Like he hit Mooney right in stride, and later on, I think the Falcons. I'm not sure if the Falcons closed that drive out with a touchdown or not. They may have, but that's another issue for Atlanta with the red zone penalties that we'll get to. But yeah, 2 more turnovers. They were really bad turnovers too, and honestly, it should have been 3. There was one pass that the defender did sort of undercut a little bit, and it was one where Drake London just sort of snatched from the defensive back, and it was one where Drake London just showed his prowess and sort of demonstrated his strength and just how aggressive he can be as a wide receiver. So that was a hell of a play by London. But yeah, Cousins was really lucky not to have 3 picks. Both interceptions were really bad. And it's just overall, he has 8 interceptions and no touchdowns over the last 4 weeks. That's really unacceptable. Like that's insanely terrible. And I mean, to his credit, I don't like him saying it in the press conference because, I feel like he's sort of throwing his teammates under the bus a little bit, but he is right. The team was tied at 21 going into that 4th quarter. And then the next time Cousins touched the ball, they were down 35-21. I feel like overall, it wasn't the disaster that we may have been expecting going into Minnesota, but still the team needs him to be a lot better than, multiple turnovers. Like Kirk Cousins cannot turn the ball over at this clip because he is the veteran quarterback you have in there to sort of calm the game down. And, this is sort of the issue that we had with Desmond Ridder the last couple of years, all the turnovers. And the only thing is with Ritter, at least he was a bit more mobile, and he was what, a tenth of the cost year over year in annual valuation. But yeah, we definitely, it was better than the Chargers, but it still wasn't good enough.
Yeah, and it's never just one thing. Like I think we've talked about that. Like Kirk is especially over the last, I think, 3 games especially, but 4 games and counting, obviously hasn't thrown a touchdown and has been turning the ball over. There are other aspects involved. Certainly in the Vikings game, the defense completely falling apart in the fourth quarter doesn't help things. The special teams turnover doesn't help anything. But at this point, the offense is becoming difficult to scheme around Kirk's limitations. And I think that long term, that's not something that you want to have to do. Can it work maybe over a single season? Could it work over the rest of the season, especially with easier defenses on the schedule? I think we've seen that it can work, right? Like, especially against undermanned defenses. We've seen this offense have success against bad defenses. They've absolutely torched the Bucs. The problem is when this team plays good teams, especially good defenses, that's when the limitations really come into focus. And I think that's why we're seeing the dichotomy in this, I guess, the way they play against different levels of competition. Like this offense can't get it done, and I think the quarterback's a big part of it. Obviously, we could probably be getting more from Zach Robinson. He's a first-time OC. He's learning. I do think this week we did see some really interesting things in the run game. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, too. Just like that, the run game, like this run game performance was definitely the best of the season. Like against this defense, being able to run the ball as well as they did, being able to run the ball inside, which we've been asking for ages. That was nice to see. So I do think that I think we can expect like Zach Robinson to get better incrementally. And I think we have seen over the course of the season some of that stuff improve. Kirk, I don't know how realistic it is that we're going to get improvements. And I think that's the crux of the argument. Like, we've got 4 games left. First of all, is it worth it to stick with Kirk just to win these 4 games and make the playoffs? That's one consideration. Is it worth it, long term? I think there's like 2 kind of aspects to the conversation about sticking with Cousins. The short term, aka rest of season 2024. Is it the best option for winning games this year and making the playoffs? And then the long-term discussion of is playing Kirk the rest of the season better off long-term from the angle of, could we rehab trade value and possibly get something for him? Is it going to stunt Penix's growth next year when maybe we could have given Penix a 4-game, sort of soft launch here? There's a lot of aspects to it, but I guess let's start with sort of the short term, which is kind of the topic we're on. With Cousins' limitations physically and the fact that like he's just simply not making good decisions with the football, and you add that on top of everything else going on with Cousins, and it creates a bad picture. Like, he's having one of the worst stretches for a quarterback since at least the early 2000s. Let's take it from both sides. What do you think the upside is to sticking with Kirk the rest of the year versus going with Penix? Because I'm sure we don't think these guys aren't having the conversation about Penix, right? I expect that they are. I think they're maybe coming to the wrong conclusion, but like, if we're playing devil's advocate here, because I think you guys all know our thoughts on Penix, we were basically in favor of moving on last week. But what do you think, Adnan, in terms of the short term? What's like the upside possibly of sticking with Cousins over these final 4 games?
I do think there is upside, and I think the upside is in rehabbing his trade value, because you have some very light defenses coming up, some defenses which have not been very prolific against the pass, and the Raiders, the Giants, the Commanders are a bit better, and then you have the Panthers. And I feel like you have a chance to sort of, if things start getting back on track, you have a chance to maybe convince some teams to, possibly work with you in making a move for Cousins, some desperate teams, of course, over the offseason. So I feel like that would be my number one sort of upside to this entire thing, because I feel like as more time passes, as more games go along, I feel like it's becoming more and more obvious that Michael Penix does need to be the week one starter next year. Just because if Cousins looks like this now, like it's not going to get any better as he ages. That's not, quarterbacks don't tend to become more mobile as they get into their late 30s. So that's number one. The other thing is, he is, to his credit, he is a veteran. He has played in very big moments in the past, and you sort of don't have to throw Michael Penix right into this pressure cooker of a situation where you sort of have to win every single game, or you're most likely going to be cooked. So as that veteran quarterback, you hope that he's going to make better decisions moving forward. But yeah, that's basically what I'm looking at as, the upside to continuing to stick with Cousins despite these struggles of, you just sort of hope that he figures it out, and you sort of hope that he gets out of his own head a little bit when he is, faced with some easier defenses, because in fairness, the Vikings, Chargers, and Broncos, that is a bit of a gauntlet of defenses over the past few weeks. Now, I'm not giving Kirk a reprieve just because these are good defenses. At the end of the day, you are being paid as the franchise quarterback, and the way you're performing isn't, close to satisfactory. But, the schedule gets lighter, and you can sort of prop him up a little bit in the trade market if he does play better.
Yeah. No, I think that's a big part of it. And to me, I think the biggest upside to playing Cousins is probably for roster / salary cap management type stuff, where there is a realistic chance. Like, I think it's pretty much guaranteed that Cousins is going to look better over these final 4 games than he looked over the previous 4. I think anyone, even the biggest Cousins haters, of which I really don't think we are Cousins haters at all. Like, I think we've been pretty fair to him over the course of the year and are kind of accurately portraying where where he's playing at this moment. But I mean, I think even the biggest Cousins haters would probably have to say, like, it's very likely that he's going to play better over these final 4 games because of the competition that he's playing. If he doesn't play better over these final 4 games, then I think that answers every question you possibly have. But yeah, I mean, I think that the upside to Cousins playing is certainly that he can deliver 4 pretty good games on offense. I think there probably will still be turnover issues, and that's unfortunate. But hopefully they won't be backbreaking. Hopefully he can, manage to keep the highs, like keep the high level stuff, the positive plays there, and maybe cut down on the mistakes a little bit. Maybe feel a little bit less pressure because the quality of defense, the quality of coverage and pass rush, it's not going to be as high, so you don't have to try to force it as much. And to me, the upside would obviously be that he does finish strong. Maybe they make the playoffs, maybe they don't. But either way, recency bias is very strong in the NFL. And 4 weeks from now, if Cousins has 4 350-yard passing games and throws for another, 8 touchdowns over the next 4 games, then people will teams will look at that and say, oh, he can still play. If the Falcons aren't really asking much for him, we might be able to, we can sell our fan base on this. And keep him. No, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say we can sell that, but knowing the Falcons, the other side of that coin is if that happens, then the Falcons are probably going to convince themselves that, hey, he is the answer for next year as well, because this team does have some precedent in sort of sticking too long to certain characters and letting some of these fool's gold wins kind of cloud their view of what the bigger picture is. And I'm just it just sort of feels like a no-win at this point, because I don't trust the team to make that difficult decision with Kirk Cousins. I mean, there's nothing so far that we've seen that suggests that they are capable of making those difficult decisions.
Yeah, I think that is certainly a danger too. Like that, they they sort of like go too far and they're like, oh wait, no, we should keep him, instead of realizing the alternative. But I don't know. To me, it's like I really hope that's not the case. I'm not gonna tolerate that nightmare right now. That's too dark for me. But the way they structured the contract with 10 million of his guarantees not guaranteeing until after the start of the league year, so they do have an opportunity to trade him after year one. The way they baked that into the structure does indicate that this was a potential path that they were considering taking, which is we could move on this offseason and get something back for him, anything really. I mean, I think they would be happy to take a day 3 pick, because they need picks, in case you guys forgot. Yeah.
Hey, I mean, hey, they did sacrifice a 5th-round pick for him as well in that tampering
get it back.
case.
That'd be perfect. That would be perfect. You trade him for a 5th, and you get the tampering pick back. That actually would be hilarious if we could make that work. But like, he's only going to cost, like, everybody looks and they're like, oh, he's 40 million next year. No one's trading for that. He's 27.5 million to the trading team. And the next year he's only got 10 million guaranteed. So somebody else trading for him can get a 1-year rental of Kirk Cousins for 27.5 million and only owe him 10 million next, in 2026 if they decide they want to move on, which is probably likely. So basically you're getting a year of a veteran quarterback that you can kind of sell your fan base on. Maybe, not saying that I would take this route or recommend it, but look around the NFL and tell me that you don't think any team would do something like this. Okay. Like, guys, like, I'm just saying, like, I don't think anyone should be ruling this out. So you're basically spending $37 million or whatever it is for, 1 to 2 years of Kirk Cousins and giving your fans some kind of quarterback to rally behind. Like for example, the Raiders can draft a quarterback, certainly, but if the Raiders had the opportunity to get Cousins for that type of money, like last year, they already did. Like they already did that with Jimmy Garoppolo. They happily went out and signed Jimmy Garoppolo, and proceeded to not really get much out of him. But they tried to sell their fans that they had a quality quarterback at Jimmy Garoppolo. So somebody could try to do this for sure. And look, it doesn't save the Falcons much in terms of like cap space, right? I mean, but that's saving anything really is kind of the point right now. Like, you're just trying to move on from the mistake as quickly as possible. You get that trade-off and you do save a little bit of money. You save $2.5 million. Not much, but you do save something and you move on and he'll be completely off your books. You don't need to do any crazy like post June 1st, type stuff to facilitate that. So, that's probably the route, and the upside would be maybe you play well enough to finish out the season. Maybe you make the playoffs, and then maybe you can kind of flip that into a trade, like trading him away, with the idea that you don't really sell it as, oh, Kirk Cousins is washed, we're trying to get rid of him. Just like, we've got Michael Penix, and like we built this offense for Michael Penix. We're ready to play the rookie. And like, we don't want Kirk to have to sit behind Penix. Like, we basically have evaluated our roster. We want to start Michael Penix. We don't want to keep Kirk like here just to, like, he's on towards the end of his career. We don't want to force him to back up Michael Penix. We're not going to hold him. So we'll allow him to go elsewhere. And we're not going to obviously charge a lot because he is nearing the end of his career and he's expensive. So that could be the upside, I think, is that he does play well enough to sort of rehab his trade value, and maybe the Falcons can still make the playoffs, because again, I don't think it's out of the question that he's going to play better over the remaining 4 games. In terms of the downside, short term, you mentioned it, that he plays well enough to convince the Falcons that they should just keep him and play him next year too. And if that happens, I think we're probably setting this team back at least half a season, because they're not going to start him and then bench him within a few games or anything like that. We know he's going to be starting at least half the year. So that's a scary thought. And obviously the obvious is that he continues playing poorly. and they missed the playoffs because of his continued turnovers and limitations. That would be the other downside.
Say, if the goal is to if the goal is to make the playoffs, if the goal is to win the division, I think your best bet is to insert Penix. And I get it; he is a rookie. It's not, like I mentioned, it's not fair to him to put him in that situation of, all right, go out there and win out, or our season is finished, and it'll be insanely disappointing. But sometimes you just need a spark. And one thing I, I'm not saying that Zach Robinson has been, the most amazing play caller, but I do give him a bit of a reprieve because there's just so much he's limited in being able to do as a play caller when his quarterback is not mobile, like, at all. And if his quarterback is, throwing some of these ducks that Kirk Cousins is throwing, and if his quarterback is just one of the most physically limited, arguably the most physically limited quarterback in the NFL. Like, even Aaron Rodgers, who's older, I think can still move around way better than Cousins can, because that was always part of his game, and he can still do it a little bit post Achilles injury. So maybe it allows Robinson to open up the playbook a little bit. Maybe Penix comes in and just lights the world on fire, and you sort of, then the fan base really has hope no matter what happens down the stretch this season. But it sort of reminds me, it takes me back. I know this is just one game, and it's not like this isn't the last stretch, but it takes me back to when Nick Saban in the national championship against Georgia benched Jalen Hurts for Tua Tagovailoa. That was an incredibly difficult decision. Hurts had been their quarterback all the way up until that point, and now he puts in this 5-star freshman. And remember what happened to after a rough first series, just lit UGA up. I remember very personally where I was when I watched that game. So it's sort of, I think, maybe the same idea of maybe Penix can give this team the spark it needs, because even though they blew some coverages, and it was really ugly for a few plays there against Minnesota, the defense, at the very least, the pass rush has started to come along a little bit since the bye week. I think they have 9 sacks over the last couple games. So I think the defense can, down this stretch, give you enough to where you could even win out if your offense doesn't just get in its own way.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It does frustrate me, because I agree with what you're saying. I think, like, I don't know. I'm frustrated with the whole experience, the whole experience of Kirk Cousins. And I know I did see Joe in the chat, saying that part of the problem is Robinson isn't really building the offense around Kirk's limitations. He's just sort of expecting him to overcome them. And, I think part of it is that's true. I think the other part of it is that this personnel is designed for the offense to work this way. And I think we've seen that the personnel executes this stuff, or is certainly capable of executing it at a high level. And I think they know they're imminently going to be changing this offense over to Penix at some point in the near future. So part of it's why should I, we paid Kirk this money expecting him to come and run our offense that we thought he could run. The fact that he can't, why should I change the offense that we've built to accommodate Kirk, for a couple games here to finish out the season? Part of me wonders, if really, the most frustrated person in the building is Zach Robinson, who's I got all these pieces together. We schemed all this stuff up. It's hard enough for me, as a first-time OC, to put this all together in the first place, and now I have to do it with a quarterback that can't really execute what we thought he was going to be able to do when he got here. So I could understand that angle too. Obviously, it would be nice if he could, adjust to his quarterback. And, I'm certain that he's tried. I think this week we saw that they were trying to emphasize the middle of the field more. Kirk does seem to throw better to the middle of the field. I didn't think the velocity issues we were seeing the previous week, especially throwing to the outside. They didn't really go to that much. I think this week we saw a lot more over the middle throws, and I thought he looked. I think Kirk looked a lot better throwing over the middle, more comfortable. Still made bad decisions, unfortunately, but did look more comfortable. But yeah, I think like it's just frustrating to be in that situation, and in some ways I sort of don't blame Zach for probably being stubborn and not really wanting to change to accommodate Kirk. Especially when they paid him this much money and they were really expecting him to be able to do these sort of basic things, I think that he just can't now. That's probably not Robinson's fault, obviously, that Kirk isn't able to do those things, but still frustrating. But yeah, I guess moving on to sort of the long-term outlook, I think we're getting into more of that, which is like, I think it's obvious that playing Cousins is probably bad for the team long term, because some people are filled with, I don't want to like throw anyone under the bus or like criticize any fans, like you guys I think have your takes, and that's totally fine. I do think that this like trepidation around starting Penix because like, oh well, what if Penix struggles, or what if Penix does this or that, like, yeah, like he might struggle, but like that is part of the process. Like we're not like, people are like, oh, you're throwing him into the fire. Like, you're not throwing him into the fire. You're like, the season's basically like over. Like, the only way for them to win is to win out. So like, you're not putting Penix in the lineup so that you can make the playoffs and hoping that he's going to go 4-0 and all this stuff. You're putting him in because Kirk is not working, and long term the future of your team is Michael Penix, and you've got 3 soft opponents and 1 soft defense left on the schedule. That's a perfect introduction to the NFL for Michael Penix. The offensive line is all healthy, the weapons are all healthy. This is the perfect opportunity to put Penix in the lineup and give him 4 games to get his feet wet in the NFL and find out what you've got in the rookie. And like, this is not a total evaluation where you're going to be like, well, if Penix struggles at all, we're like, not, now it's over. It's not like that. We do need to see Penix. I would prefer to get him reps before we're relying on him for the whole season, because I would argue, like, if they started him week 1, that would be more like throwing him into the fire. But now he's had, this is 15 weeks now to learn the offense, 15 weeks of being in practice plus training camp. This is not like some 20-year-old Anthony Richardson-esque quarterback that doesn't have like any like, this is one of the most experienced quarterbacks in college football. Like, so I guess I don't get the fear around putting Penix in at this point. Like, I think that, like, I don't think people should be afraid of seeing what we have in Michael Penix, because whether you wait until next year or not, like, that doesn't really change anything in my mind with regards to Michael Penix.
Yeah, I mean, he did come in 24 years old. I mean, that was one of the criticisms to to the drafting by some people, but yeah, he is very experienced, and you're always going to sort of run the risk, of, is he or isn't he? Like, if Michael Penix is bad, then you're going to find out eventually. Like, I'm not saying he is going to be bad, but seeing it, you would rather be able to evaluate him in real time, earlier. The sooner the better. Just and that's one of the reasons why I lost my mind a little bit when he was pulled from the preseason after 1 game, because he wasn't going to start. Obviously, like, they were never going to start him, and he wasn't given those live in-game reps. And I feel like any NFL player will tell you that those in-game reps are not the same as practice reps. Like, you doing a joint practice is not the same as live action. A defensive tackle is still coming after you, flattening you out, and then, let's see what happens next. But yeah, so I don't feel like you can. I don't feel like it's a best practice to just try to hide, the fact that, Michael Penix, is, playing poorly if he does play poorly. Like someone in the chat mentioned it also earlier. It was a really good point. Antonio James. Um, Cousins isn't getting, hounded by pressure here either. Like it would be part of the equation if the offensive line was just collapsing in on itself, and if Kirk Cousins was just, getting, destroyed, and he was making very quick, poor throws as a result of it. But yeah, he's only been sacked what 5 times over the last 4 games. Like the offensive line is definitely holding up its end of the bargain, both in run blocking and in pass protection. And I feel like this is, maybe even the best stretch we've seen from the O line just in pass blocking, maybe in a number of years over these past few, which makes it even more maddening that Cousins is incredibly clean in that pocket, and he's still making some of these inexplicable throws. So I don't think the offensive line is really going to be a huge issue for Michael Penix either.
Yeah. No, I think that was one of the biggest fears about going with Penix this year was that, can we, trust Caleb McGarry to now be a blindside pass protector for Michael Penix? Like, Caleb McGarry's having a very good season, so good for him. I think he was one of the guys that was, he last year was kind of like, and like we thought maybe it was like, is this just like a blip? Like he's having a better year as a pass protector, but is that just the way they've designed the offense and all this stuff? McGarry is just having a better year this year. And so I don't think it's as big of a concern as it has been. And like the offensive line, like going back to that Vikings game, like this was the best game of the year for the holding penalties notwithstanding. Obviously that's not great, but the whole team was sloppy as hell penalty wise. So I don't want to single out the O-line for that. But like run blocking wise, this was their most impressive performance by far. Kyle Pitts had a bad game as a receiver, but as a blocker, he had a great game. Like this was the best I've seen him block all season. And the offensive line, like the Vikings are one of the NFL's best pass rushers, one of the NFL's most aggressive pass rushes. And these guys, like Zach Robinson, to his credit, he put together a game plan that really protected Kirk Cousins, was able to keep him clean for the most part. I think the offensive line did their part. Bijan obviously did a fantastic job blocking. Bijan's like one of their biggest like pass blockers. Like he's key.
Bijan's been so impressive in picking up the blitz this year. I feel like it's something that he's really emphasized on his game in just all year. He's just been so impressive just as that, pass blocker. And it's really sort of, in my opinion, taken him into that sort of elite tier of those, great bell cow running backs at this point.
Yeah, I agree. And that's just going to add to his resume, his ability to never have to come off the field for that stuff. But I think, again, that's another reason why we shouldn't be afraid to go to Penix, but because the pass protection, like they've been tested against 3 very good pass rushes over the past 3 weeks, Denver, Los Angeles, and the Vikings, and they've held up. It's really not been the pass protection's problem. So I do think that reason shouldn't be like, I think we've kind of moved beyond that. Like, I think it's like, no, like I honestly think this is a great situation to put your young quarterback on the field in, because it's an opportunity for him to create a heroic narrative, right? And sports are all about narratives for the fans, for the media, but for the players too. Like that's how legends are made, and giving Penix the opportunity, the team is sinking. You go to your rookie top 10 pick quarterback. It's like all upside. It's like if he comes in and struggles and goes like 2-2, then it's like, well, we got to see the rookie. It wasn't, as good as we hoped, but again, it's like this was not really a super realistic scenario that he was going to win this game, like win out the rest of the way. Like even if he played well, it's like the rest of the team, who knows how that's going to handle. But like you're giving him an opportunity to create that story where he could go on a heroic run. He could win out. He could take this team to heights that it really hasn't been able to reach outside of a couple games. And I think the value of that sort of launching his career in Atlanta is kind of underrated. And also, like, even if nothing crazy happens and you just get Penix 4 games worth of experience, I think that's very valuable in itself. Like, getting those reps for Penix long term, especially for next year, when I think at this point he should be starting next year. I don't really think we can.
Yeah.
Like it. I think it's like if you just had Kirk and you didn't have Michael Penix, you'd be playing Kirk next year, and you just have to kind of resign yourself to that and just hope that it gets better. But because you have Penix, you don't need to go down that road. Like, you don't need to be planning about how to make it work with Kirk Cousins next year. You can just start planning for how to move on with Michael Penix. And I think moving on to getting him reps and preparing him to be your quarterback in 2025, that to me is the most important thing, because we've seen how thin the margins are in this league, right? Like, if the Falcons beat the Saints in the second Saints game when they really should have, we're probably like feeling very confident that this team is going to make the playoffs. You change one game and it's a completely different story. You can't really afford to have a slow September where Penix is struggling, when maybe you could have prevented it by getting him his first NFL reps at the end of this season instead of waiting to throw him in the lineup to start the next year.
Yeah, maybe if you play your starters in the preseason, you don't get out to that slow start. You don't come out looking incredibly flawed against the Steelers in a very, very winnable game, which was down to the wire, and then you don't get off to that slow start in week 2. But I digress. So we'll have the same conversation next year when Raheem Morris benches all the starters again. But we'll get to that when we get there.
We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But
and we know that the bridge is going to be there eventually.
Yeah, it will be there. But yeah, I mean, we'll have to see. But I think I think it's sort of like short term. I don't, maybe it's sort of the same, right? It's like maybe Cousins can come in and give you that spark, and I think the chance of that happening is worth it. But short term also, like, maybe you expect Kirk to play better, and maybe you can rehab his trade value. And I think if that is the idea behind this, and they're just like, look, we need to sort of find an exit strategy for Kirk, and that's like, I think a lot of people are reading this the wrong way and saying they don't trust Michael Penix, that's why he's not playing. And I do wonder if it's actually that they trust Penix completely, and it's more about clearing the way for Penix to start next year and sort of clearing the roster hurdles, fixing as much of the salary cap mistake as you can with the Penix contract. Like, I don't know. I think that, to me, that's the only sort of acceptable explanation for all this.
And I accept that answer if that is what they're doing. Like, if they are looking at this from the perspective of let's rehab Kirk's trade value and we're going to go into 2025 with Michael Penix, then yeah, you know what, so be it. But I don't, I feel like it would be unacceptable for the team to, like we said, talk themselves into Kirk Cousins next year. Or I feel like we'll see what their motives were after that 5th day of the league year, because that's when that $10 million guarantees in 2026. I feel like if Kirk Cousins is still on the roster at that point, then there's going to be some different discussions, a different sort of train to be ridden when it comes to this conversation. But we won't know. We can't know. Of course, they won't tell us anything. But yeah, if that is the reasoning, then yeah, I'm for it, and I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's. I guess we won't know. We won't know for a long time. I think a lot of fans, and again, not calling out anyone in particular, assuming that the team is completely incompetent and never doing anything for logical reasons, or they just don't know what they're doing. That's not really that mindset. Maybe it doesn't really help you decipher anything, because I guarantee you they're thinking a lot about these decisions and they think they're doing the right thing. So to really sort of try to figure out what's going on, you have to think it through from their perspective. And I think the point that Adnan raised, the nightmare scenario of, they're really trying to, I think the worst case scenario is they're very much still in on Kirk Cousins and they really want Kirk to lead the team next year too. For whatever reason, maybe it's some cost fallacy. Maybe it's that they just don't want to give up on the contract or they don't want to look stupid or all that stuff. That would be bad. I think that if that's the angle, that would be very, very bad. You don't want that to happen. I think more likely this team is realistic about where Kirk Cousins is, knowing that he probably can be a passable starter somewhere, especially if they're willing to craft a limited offense around him to take advantage of that. Kirk could be a game manager. The only thing keeping Kirk from being a game manager, I think, is partially him because he's going balls to the wall out there. But he could do that. I think,
it's hard. It's hard for these guys who have been on top, and Kirk Cousins, for the criticisms that he's had around him, he's been a top 10 quarterback in this league for many years. It's hard to accept it. It's hard to accept that you can't do what you can't do what you could do in the past, and in accepting that role of, okay, let me just try not to lose this game, even though that's what would have had this team now in first place in the division, because had he just done that against the Chargers, the Falcons would have won. They would have had a decent chance against the Vikings of winning. But yeah, it's that old saying, right? Sometimes you got to leave the game before the game leaves you, and it's a psychological battle within some of these athletes who have been there and who, in their minds, they know what they have to do, but their body just isn't sort of cooperating. And but that's something the Falcons really need Kirk Cousins to figure out yesterday. This isn't something, if you can't do it, then just, take a step back and just, manage the game a little bit. It's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah. No, and that's part of the problem with the whole situation, right? It is the Falcons gave Kirk this contract and all this money because he was expected to elevate this offense. He was expected to be the piece that, he was supposed to be a force multiplier. And what's ended up happening is he's not that. I think at most he's a facilitator, but at worst he's pulling them down. And I think that, I think that's part of the calculus, hoping that Kirk could be an extra coach on the field and he could work with Zach Robinson to, Zach's a first-year play caller. He's going to have his limitations. So Kirk can erase mistakes because he's going to process and he's going to find, the matchups that are good, and he's going to be able to go through his progressions and all this stuff. He's just not, Kirk isn't delivering on that right now. He's really not getting through his progressions at all. He's just not seeing the field. It's puzzling because this is not stuff that Kirk has traditionally struggled with. I think, on Sunday, we finally saw for the first time in weeks a high-level play, I think, processing play, where we saw Kirk look off the linebacker towards Bijan and then hit Ray over the middle when he came completely wide open because the linebacker bit. But that worked. I think that worked so well is because Kirk's just been staring down his receivers for weeks now that they were so surprised. They were just oh, yeah, whoever he's looking at, the ball's going there. And it actually worked really well on that play. But, we should be getting those plays from Kirk every week, and we're getting them extremely sporadically. And it's we needed him to be the floor quarterback, not just the ceiling quarterback. He's given us ceiling games. He's just, the floor is gone. The floor is worst quarterback in the NFL right now. And I think that's part of the reason this is such a struggle, but it's also the reason why going to Michael Penix is nowhere near as big of a risk, because we've seen Kirk's lows. They're as low as you can get. So, Michael Penix isn't realistically going to be any worse than that. I mean, this is one of the worst four-game stretches of any quarterback in the last 20 years. I mean, it can't really get that much worse. It's not to say that Kirk doesn't do anything right or doesn't make any throws. He clearly does. But, his limitations have really started to become apparent. And, yeah, like you said, the psychological stuff is really what's holding back this offense. Not The physical is limiting, but the physical is really not what's killed them. It's the psychological mistakes at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something where it's really frustrating because you expect the psychological part of the game to be what comes easy to the guy who's been in the league for 15 years. Like if Michael Penix was out here and if he was struggling, with sort of going through the reads, going through the progressions, you'd say, okay, you know what? It's not great. It's not promising, but yeah, he's a rookie. Maybe the nerves are happening. Maybe the game's being sped up a little bit too much for him. But you brought Kirk Cousins in to avoid that. You gave Kirk Cousins all the money to avoid having that happen with your rookie, quarterback whom you took. And I mean, it was much to our chagrin of doing both, signing Cousins and drafting Penix. But it's like, okay, at the very least this year, you should have that, team that wins now. And it's frustrating that this team damn near the identical spot that they were in last year, despite the fact that they've just, sort of hindered their cap a little bit for, this upcoming season. I mean, it's not anything they can't get out of, but there's going to be some very heartbreaking decisions, maybe heartbreaking decisions, depending on how you look at some of these players who are going to be, on the chopping block. But yeah, the Falcons will lose some of this talent most likely because they won't be able to get out of Kirk Cousins's cap hit next year, because it will take a minor miracle to convince someone to take Cousins off your hands.
Yeah, and and that's the thing. Like realistically, you're not getting out of Kirk Cousins cap hit next year, right? Like even if you trade him, you get 2.5 million back, which is nothing. The benefit of it obviously is that you get out of it the next year and the next year and all that stuff. Like you clear, if you eat it all this year in 2025, you clear the decks. So there's no more big quarterback contract in 2026 or 2027. There's no more guaranteed money. There's no prorated stuff. It's all gone. So that's nice. And the Falcons do have options to create some cap space. They're not exactly they're cutting it close right now to the limit. But again, we have some tough decisions to make with Grady Jarrett. I'm guessing they'll probably get Jarrett maybe to agree to a different contract. I don't know. That's going to be dicey, but he's making over $20 million, and I just don't know that they can afford that. Same thing with Onyemata. He's more likely to be cut. That's like an $8 million, cap hit there.
So I'm not going to be so heartbroken over, honestly.
No, it hasn't been the same this year. Last year, when he was healthy, was amazing. Loved it. But yeah, unfortunate. But yeah, and there's a couple of guys maybe you can collect some savings from, but for the most part, you're going to have to kind of cobble it together. You're not really going to have much to spend, and that means probably a relatively quiet free agency period. Doing some more bargain hunting type stuff, and you also don't have a lot of picks. So next year is very much like sort of a reset year for this team. But I'd be much happier resetting with Michael Penix than trying to reset with Kirk Cousins, where it's like, that's just not going to go well. So I think, I guess, yeah, I mean, at this point, I think it's pretty clearly not like, I think that the answer to the question of the episode is sticking with Cousins the right decision. I think it's like, it depends on what they're doing, right? Like if they're really focused on the future and trying to rehab Cousins' value to potentially get some kind of pick for him and get out of that contract, then I think, yes, like maybe you could spin this as being the right decision. If it's not that, yeah.
I choose to believe that because I don't want to believe the alternative.
Yeah.
Because the alternative just sort of showcases that the decision makers are a bit incompetent. And I've had enough of incompetent decision makers with this franchise. But I'll choose to have hope.
Yeah, that's the only thing we could do is try to hope. So in that case, it might not be the worst decision in the world. I do think that there is a compelling case to also be made for starting Penix, especially if Kirk has another bad game. Like, I think the next bad game that Kirk has will be his last.
Especially if they lose. They lose to
Yeah.
the Raiders.
Oh,
I think
God.
it's like, okay.
Oh, God. Yeah. No, that would be nightmare fuel. Yeah. So yeah, if they lose to the Raiders, it's over for Cousins. The season's over, first of all, but also like, yeah, it's over for Cousins too, and probably over for his career as a starter. I'm not, because you're probably not he's going to be benched, and then no one's going to trade for him, and then he's forced to just sit the bench in Atlanta for the next year. So, it is what it is, unfortunately. But it's complicated. It's a tough situation. I certainly am not happy about it. And like, look, it's easy for us to say, oh yeah, just put the rookie in, whatever. Like, there's a lot more that goes into it, including like managing relationships, managing the expectations of your owner, all this stuff, the financial, like just the cash alone of Kirk Cousins and deciding to move on from that. Like, we're talking about the cap, but the cash is also something. I mean, blank forked out, however many millions of dollars for Kirk Cousins. Like, that's also a lot. That's part of the equation that I think sometimes gets lost. But at the end of the day, you just have to make the best moves to win football games. And, we'll see what the best long-term move is. As of right now, Falcons are sticking with Kirk Cousins. It could be the right decision. It could also be a terrible decision. So I guess we'll see. If you're obsessed with making the playoffs, maybe Cousins is the best ticket to that. Maybe not. But
even if you do, it's like,
well, we know that's the thing. Yeah.
What's this team going to do in the playoffs? Like, it's this isn't a good football team. Like, I think the record shows who they are, and I think if they weren't playing in the worst division in football, the record would be a lot worse, and we would have been talking about mock drafts if this team was in the NFC North or in the NFC West or any other. Honestly, any other NFC division.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, we know that's the thing too. Like, if they do make the playoffs with Penix, it's like, well, maybe he does offer you more upside, or maybe there is something untapped there. There's also the chance that, yeah, he sinks you with some rookie mistakes, but like, Kirk is making rookie mistakes right now with his processing, so it's not like Kirk's protecting you from rookie mistakes. So I think, though, like, and that's what I wanted to communicate tonight. And I think we did a good job with that, Adnan. Is it is a complicated situation. It's not just bench or don't bench, and there's nothing else going on here. There is some nuance to it. There are multiple angles to consider, including the financial angle. But yeah, I think I'm still worried that not benching Cousins will end up being a mistake. But I think that there is a potential path where it could work out. So that's just what we have to hope for at this point, because it doesn't seem like Penix is going to be playing anytime soon. Perhaps not even this year.
Yeah, probably not, but I do feel like we've covered all bases in what the conversation probably has been in the background.
Yeah, and we want it to be fair. Obviously to the front office and the coaching staff and all this. This is not an easy decision to make. That's why I'm saying, like, I would like to see a bold move here from Raheem. And, I think some of the great coaches, we've seen these bold moves that they've done that lead to these great narratives, to these great stories emerging about, made the tough call to bench the high priced veteran to go with the rookie. Raheem did something like this with Byron Leftwich and Josh Freeman, or like with his Tampa Bay. He did go with the young quarterback and Josh Freeman, and that did lead to a good season. And then obviously that didn't last, but
And in fairness to Raheem, maybe this isn't his call entirely. Like, maybe there is some pressure from the GM, maybe there's some pressure from ownership, because it's you bench Kirk Cousins, and if you have to swallow that from Cousins, then it's gonna look really bad for Terry Fontenot, and that's another conversation that we're going to have a few weeks from now after the season ends. But, that's for a different night.
Yeah. That we will definitely have more of those conversations, especially in the off season, I think. But, it is. If I wasn't a fan, I would say the situation was fascinating. I would say this is a really interesting like spot for this team to be in. You don't see this super often, right? I mean, the whole situation with drafting a quarterback and signing a quarterback is pretty unprecedented. So, if I wasn't so invested in this damn team, I would say this was fascinating. Instead, it's more like
it's
infuriating. Yeah, it's more infuriating than anything. But we'll just have to live through it. That's really our only choice here, and hope
As
for
we
the
always
best. Yep, we'll just have to weather the storm, but it's a lot more fun weathering it with you guys. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. I'm sure you guys have noticed Michael Turner is not here. He is going to come on the show. We will be recording with Turner tomorrow, and I will be getting that up next week, probably on Wednesday, because we won't have a live next week. So we will have Michael Turner on the show. He had something unfortunately come up tonight, but we'll be talking to him tomorrow. And yeah, patrons, if you do want to ask questions for Turner, put those in the Discord channel, the patron channel. I may have an opportunity to ask a couple of questions, so if you've got some, feel free to add those in there, and we will try to get a couple of those in if we can. I know he's got multiple commitments tomorrow as well. We're trying to work it in, but just wanted to put that out there in case anyone wanted to try to get some questions in. I know he was hoping to be on tonight too, so hopefully we'll be able to get him on live at some point in the future. But in the meantime, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Please like, subscribe if you haven't already. Please leave us that 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. And yeah, check out the Patreon. I just mentioned it, patreon.com/Falcoholic Live, the YouTube channel memberships as well. And of course, check out everything that Adnan's got going on. He's at Say Which Way on Twitter. Do you have a blue sky yet, Adnan?
I do not. I am. It's so intimidating to just start
yeah.
from zero.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Start.
I've tried to cross post a little. I haven't really gotten into it yet, but I made the account, so I got that far. But yeah,
I've never made a TikTok. I've never made a blue. It's one of those where it's just just starting from nothing. It's just.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a little weird, but yeah, just in case this platform, Twitter turns into even more of a hellscape than it is now, I'm ready to go on the blue skies. But anything else you're working on, Adnan? What let people know about?
Series history coming out soon. You will be happy to know the Falcons do have a winning record against the Raiders, but you can read more in series history. And then what if the Falcons win or lose, which just becomes a de facto every year, looking at draft odds, which hopefully it doesn't turn into that. But if they lose, then that's what that article will probably turn into.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, that's a good point. No, well, hopefully we won't go down that path just yet, but
Monday game, Monday nighter this week. So
right.
the Falcons are on national television.
I'm still surprised about that, but I was saying that it's probably because it's in Vegas. They didn't want to cancel people's tickets to the Vegas game. They're really desperate to make that a destination city to go watch football games. So
speaking of Vegas, hopefully the Hawks close this thing out, and hopefully they're playing in Vegas this weekend as well for the NBA Cup. It would be really cool because there are plenty of Falcons fans who are probably making the trip. That sounds like one of the more fun trips. And, maybe you'll be able to go down there and catch a Hawks game on Saturday.
Yeah. No, that would be cool. It'd be really cool. So, we'll see. But yeah, it seems like the game was a little bit dicey to start, but after the half, looks like it's been improving. So certainly we'll hope they can finish strong here. So yeah, guys, thank you for joining us once again. Subscribe, all that good stuff. We will be back with a game preview for you guys prior to the weekend, going over this Raiders game, the Ritter revenge situation, maybe. I feel like it's inevitable we're going to see Desmond Ritter, right? It's going to happen. There's no way they're not going to, the football gods won't allow it. They have to play Desmond Ritter against us. I have no doubt about that. So, but I will try to I will be out of town next week for the most part. But I will try to do a post game on Monday if technology cooperates. If not, we will have at least the show with Michael Turner coming out midweek that you guys can look forward to. And then we will be back, of course, for the next week's post game, and then it'll be back to a regular schedule after that. But thank you guys for joining us and hanging out. Really appreciate you. We will see you next time on the Falcoholic Live. For myself, for Adnan, have a great night, folks. We'll see you next time on the Falcoholic.